Welcome, everybody. I've been waiting for this one for quite some time because I'm really excited in the work that you do, Nick. So welcome, Nick. Sorry, Ray. It's 7 o'clock.
Okay.
Half a cup of coffee. Please bear with me. But I am really fascinated in the work that you do, Ray. And in fact, I have been kind of a lurker on your huge Facebook group for quite some time now, and just love the information that's shared on there. So I've definitely been a lurker and somebody who's interested in this work but knows very little about it. So thank you for agreeing to come and chat to us. And so Ray is an award-winning organic gardener, which again is another beautiful thing to be doing for the world. The more organic gardening we can do, the better. Produces high quality, nutrient dense food in compact spaces. And again, another amazing skill to have given the density of our landscapes now. The more that we can produce food in smaller spaces, I think the more food safety we'll have. Um, and you combine your understanding of health and passion for mysticism, which I think is a wonderful combination and what brings you our doors today, Ray. So thank you. As I mentioned before, he is the co-administrator of the largest electroculture community online. So 200,000 members, certainly of speaking, it's probably grown since then. Hey, Ray.
We're
Um,
at about 195,000. Yeah.
that's
We haven't hit the 200K, but it's happening fast.
it's coming, and I bet you that takes some administering as well. But at work, he guides clients in creating lush gardens and sustainable homesteads through his expert application of intuitive permaculture design, which incorporates earth divination, geobiology, and core ecological principles. And I am incredibly excited and incredibly honoured to have you come and talk to us, Ray. So, without much further ado, I am going open the floor to you, Ray. Welcome, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Well, I am really honored to be here with all of you. And as I said before we hit record, it's an honor to be with groups like the House Healing Network, because I think a lot of what I have to share, many of you will be receptive on, and that's what gets me really excited. So let's jump right in, shall we? So I'm going to share my screen here. Um, this one audience window. Now, I believe you have a full view of the presentation slide. Is that correct?
We do, Ray. It's beautiful.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, okay, so I have worked on this presentation for everyone here this evening, this morning, wherever you are, watching the recording or watching live. And this is going to go about an hour and a half. I'm going to do my best to keep it on point. I have a lot of slides to cover. There's going to be opportunity for questions, not just at the end, but hopefully scattered throughout. But I do want to make a point. Any questions that are made before the end, if you can add it to the chat feed, and if it's relevant and if I'm able to focus appropriately, I might call on some questions at a few points. So those of you familiar with Zoom, I hope you're able to do that as well. Open up further here. In fact, while I am here, I'm just going to quickly have the chat feed open on my side, which it was, but it disappeared. No, someone else will have, if any questions come through, we'll have Melanie or Dawn, you both can field those
Yeah, we'll.
questions.
Right, Ray, I'll watch the chat for you. Don't worry.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, don't worry, sweetie.
So this presentation, I'm going to go into a little bit about that spirit of place. From my perspective, I'm going to integrate some of my experiences with ecological design, intuitive permaculture, holistic nutrition, which is my formal background. And I will also cover some elements of geobiology, geopathic stress, as it relates to earth divination or working with landscapes in particular, which is more of my niche. Although I do like to work on my own home when it comes to house healing, I do it more with general landscapes. So these hopefully will be some novel principles and concepts. And of course, I'm going to dive into the world of electroculture, which is utilizing electric and magnetic forces in order to grow healthier ecosystems and particularly increase food production and nutrient density of food. We're going to talk a little bit about consciousness, nature spirits as well thrown in there, and I will cover some of the harmonizing devices that we use within the more intuitive electroculture field. So more about myself here. Dawn, you gave a wonderful, wonderful introduction, and I am grateful for that. And I can assure you, I am also very humbled and honored to be here as well. I really lit up when you reached out and offered this opportunity. So I'm not going to cover this any further. Jump on. You did mention, Dawn, we have a community on Facebook called the Electroculture Beginners to Advanced Community. And this is growing in leaps and bounds. It was about 10,000 people 2 years ago, and it's just exponentially grown. It's been a lot to manage. I will be giving out a PDF at the end of this presentation later in the week. I hope you can email it out to your network, and we'll have any interactive links as well. So if you want to check out our community or any of the topics that are referenced in here, I'll have little pointers in the PDF that are clickable so you can go further. We also have a website. I have a collaborative business with a partner in St. Louis, Missouri, the United States, Energetic Agriculture, Energetic Growers. And we are focusing on electroculture and teaching these principles mainly for gardens and farms. And I'm just starting my own YouTube channel. So once more, these will be available in the PDF. So, spirit of place. This is a word that I came across when I began researching the work of Adrian in the community, as well as Tim. Dawn, I stumbled across your YouTube channel recently, and you had a wonderful video a few days ago that the British Society of Dowsers posted, and I definitely want to see you there in Victoria. Amazing. You can feel spirit of place, right? And I think many of you can affirm that. And I hope you can, and you're working towards that intuitive ability. But it's also good to understand it from an intellectual perspective in order to create some form of container to what you're tapping into. And now, if I may ask everyone who has a mic open, if you can mute them. Maybe Dawn, you can mute all mics. That has the option. But spirit of place doesn't have to be an abstract concept. It can really be as simple as feeling a gut response and not needing to put a label to it. But I do like labels sometimes, and that's what we're going to go into here. So gut response. So this is my homestead here in central Italy with my young daughter. She's 5 years old now, a bit older than here. What does spirit of place really mean to me? I mean, spirit of place is fundamentally, at least when it comes to interacting with it, it becomes, how can a space be respected, revered, honored, and acknowledged, but as a steward, which is my focus when working with ecology and growing gardens, etc., how can I make something that is not just honoring it through word, but through physical action in creating a space that is going to harmonize with the landscape in a way that supports not just material organisms, microbiology, macrobiology, but also more subtle energetics as well. And in the case of growing food, the beauty of this is when you start to work with land in this way, incredible results can happen. Now, I'm not suggesting you're going to make a zucca rather, or a winter squash as large as the photo here in the center. But it is possible to make some weird, monstrous carrots that when they fork, they actually fork to your advantage, like this one here, or gigantic cabbages like Alana Moore, who has been a teacher of mine from Ireland, which I know, Melanie, you're familiar with Alana, and maybe others in the community are as well. So when you start to work with land in a way that honors it through certain principles I'm going to share, incredible things can happen. Not just creating a space that feels sacred, that feels loving, that feels to be an oasis of sorts, but to create systems that facilitate more life. And it shows up in metrics that can be measured, like this mint plant that flowered at over 150 centimeters, or this giant zucchini that I grew that was, well, almost as long as I am. I will be honest, that particular variety can grow large, as you see the ones in the basket. But I've also seen very bizarre results when integrating not just the principles of esoteric, spirit of place with bioenergetics, or what I've seen more is also with integrating electroculture, which I mentioned earlier is utilizing passively electromagnetic forces to stimulate life. Now, the part that is relevant here is that it's not just the gross materialistic forces that we can measure through Newtonian physics, electrons, protons. It's not just electrical currents in those terms, or frequencies and magnetic radiations that can have an influence on life. There are subtle forces at play as well. And this is a bit exciting because underlining and underpinning a lot of the work that I do is more of the subtle dimensions. And I do want to mention here, it'll be in the PDF. Dawn, you mentioned the Questers Society that you and I will both be speaking at. The event will be linked up here in this presentation PDF. So spirit of place from the perspective of biology, geology, ecology, and culture. These are very, very fundamental macro components that you can start to feel, and landscapes will change. All of these interactively will change according to different pulls and tugs. The culture of a space is influenced by the overall geography, the geology, as I'll speak in a moment here, but it also influences the ecology of a space. This is a very interesting shot in the bottom right corner here. This is a property that I worked on that was occurring in a deposit, a localized valley, and it had a conductivity discontinuity, meaning that the geology below the grade of the land was influencing the atmosphere above and causing interesting phenomena to occur, such as increased presence of migratory birds, such as unique insects, and in the case of this lower photo, something that is very bizarre called the ballooning effect, in which spiders will travel up to the highest point, usually a tree, spin its web when the atmosphere is creating a pressure front, and pull itself up like a parachute and disperse itself into various locales. It's a way of traveling, in some cases, many, many kilometers, even hundreds of kilometers through the skies. But the unique thing about the geology of space is here's an example of a unique geological profile beneath that has a sacred undertone. The spiders would rain down using this effect at this particular location, as we see in the photo here. Very mysterious, something I've only seen on a few occasions, but implying that all of these principles are interconnected in ways that we are only beginning to grasp. Yin and yang, these are many things that many of you are familiar with, is linking the spirit of place to principles of polarity, opposites. This is a fundamental universal truth. The further you get to the extremes, oddly enough, the closer you reach. It's more spherical, multidimensional. But what does that mean exactly? It's not just a cultural explosion, how you can have landscapes. I am sorry. I put this slide together last few nights, and I'm jumping around a bit in a chaotic way. Sorry. So I'll go on to that point a little bit later. The space is influencing not just ecology, but it's influencing us. This is near you, Dawn, Salt Spring Island, place that I had a lot of time spent. Beneath Salt Spring is a lot of quartz deposits. The indigenous people of this region never inhabited Salt Spring Island, and they would go there for ceremony, implying that the unique geological profile beneath the land had an influence on consciousness. It was sacred, but it was a space that, well, if you spent too much time there, you are not as grounded and therefore unable to be connected to the earth, especially when you're living in a way as indigenous people on the west coast of North America did. If I have time, I'll speak to an interesting story about many of these points intersecting at something I had happen here on Salt Spring Island. But this is the point is that landscapes are changing us. We're not just coming into a space and wanting to harmonize it or change it. You first have to recognize that there are multi-dimensions that are influencing space, and we can influence it as well through intention. And I don't need to speak on that too much because I think many of you grasp it. But geology, in the case, this is Vancouver, where I came from. This is where I met my wife, present wife now, Chiara, who's Italian. I studied nutrition here and started organic master gardening many, many years ago here. And this was a culture. Vancouver is a very progressive city. And what I've seen is that in the context of space, when you integrate different elements together into its geography, its geology, you get a change in culture that is very measurable. And that became more apparent to me when I came to central Italy, which is fundamentally different, very, very volcanic, very paramagnetic. We are within proximity to the largest volcanic lake in all of Europe. It's a 20-minute drive. This entire area is fuming with radon gas, so radiation. It has a lot of minerals that are paramagnetic that are very stimulating, that cause plants to grow much larger when understood correctly. Whereas a place like Vancouver, very, very sandy, silty soil, very different. Geological features that are different, mountains that meet the sea, which creates much of a progressive, expansive quality, but also a grounded, earthy base that is, it's hard to pin it down, but when you start to see that landscapes are influencing us, you can begin to tap into that intuitively without needing to use language. So I came to Italy 12 years ago with a lofty dream to make a homestead. After I studied nutrition, we developed a We developed a farm income off our land. And you can see in the background, this is Orvieto. This is the view I have every morning. It's a medieval village that has a lot of history. It's built up on a mesa. It's a plateau that is volcanic. And the people who live here they're rooted in the earth. They're very salt of the earth people, very grounded into their heritage. There's something fundamentally different about this space. Now, it's not only the geology and the geography, history, and our relationship with it has a role, but I can affirm that I've changed greatly depending on where I live, personality. When I studied nutrition, I wanted to understand nutrient density in terms of minerals in order to increase the quality of food and come full circle and make nutrition fully holistic. Much later on, I realized that there are many other elements. This is a map here of a recent geomagnetic storm we had. I think many of you probably felt this in June, partly in July. And there's a correspondence here with the geology of the landscape and the electrification of the soil, which is very interesting. We don't have time to go into depth on telluric currents and how they influence space and how we can work with them. We'll touch on a few points. But it changes. I'm starting to come to the idea that these principles are also influencing culture. You know, volcanic rich areas, for example, of the world is the only marker that I have seen that is directly associated to human longevity. And I thought it had to do with mineral density. But now I'm realizing there's some energetic components as well. When you have places also that combine the polarity, the diamagnetic forces, paramagnetic forces, the living organic carbon ecology with the abiotic, the non-living in a harmonious way, you get a kind of synergy that facilitates greater life, greater novelty, even inspiration in many of these places. Measurable metrics. When I work with landscapes in intuitive permaculture design, what I'm trying to do is understand not just from the gross level, the sun angles, the wind, etc., permacultural principles that are fundamental with land design. What are the sensitive undertones and how can I harmonize those, often secretly, because many clients are not receptive to these principles. One of the things that I like to work with that we may have to speak about on another presentation in the future, if possible, is using power towers, which are mirroring the work of ancient menhir or monolith builders with more simple methods that can be applied at scale at a low cost to a land base that can stimulate life in a visible way. These are tubes that are filled with a combination, an appropriate yin and yang combination of paramagnetic and diamagnetic materials, rock, dust, that is done in a way using dowsing and other principles of radiesthesia, using these materials in a way that harmonizes with the space, influencing life, where we can measure it through certain photonic cameras and start to see unique phenomena of light, implying that there is a connection between not just physical substances, but color spectrums as well on life and in influencing the energetics of the space. In the case of my work, it's, as I said, it's more stimulating life and using that as a metric. And there are principles here of applying a human intention as well, using crystals and spirals, which is a part of the electrocultural movement, that are working, in this case, working as a radio receiver and antenna, connecting to the Schumann resonance of the Earth, harmonizing that in a space, and creating a central node that is like a heart that is connecting to the center of the sun, to the center of our hearts, and to the landscape that we are infusing. Hence the human intention side of things, which many of you, I believe, understand. Why do we want to do this kind of work? Well, as you'll discover working with many landscapes, is that some places it's not all rainbows and unicorns. I mean, let's be honest, the planet we live on is it's a mixed bag. And the influence of the past bleeds into the present in ways that transcend time. We can have an impact on that, but we first have to acknowledge that this is indeed the case. That there are radical traumas that can happen, but there are also subtle traumas. You know, this is radical. I've seen working as a tree planter, paid for my studies in my youth. I've seen firsthand how working with landscapes on a mass scale can degrade them. You know, the pine beetle, spruce beetle infestation of the boreal forests in Canada and in the United States is apocalyptic. And the only way that we can get a grasp on the traumas that we can cause a landscape and actually heal spaces at scale, this is the point. It's all good and well to work on the center of where we dwell with the most amount of our energy, which is usually our homes. That's fundamental. The self, your primary node, your family, then your community, and then further out, right? You need to get the fundamentals in place. But for me, how can these principles be applied at scale? How can we influence vaster amounts of space in order to have a greater impact? Because, as many of you are aware, we are experiencing accelerated crisis on this planet. We don't have to be saviors. We don't have to carry a burden because we can't do our work. We can't connect as effectively if we hold the problems of this planet on our shoulders. But you keep that with a connection. For me, it's a connection to God, it's a connection to a higher power, whatever you want to call that, that allows us greater receptivity to these forces. That may be unique to each person. But you also have to remember that the traumas that we experience and that the planet and many spaces have experienced are not always in vain, okay? This is me when I was born. I was born premature, significantly. I have complications that bleed into my present life. Missed the entire third trimester. But for me, what I've later come to realize with many physical hardships is that it's the trauma of if I take my own experience of life, being partly incarnated into my body and having a part that isn't fully embodied, yeah, it results in some physical problems that I have to endure. But it also gives me the grace of being able to attune to other things. And many of us who experience traumas, the greatest intuitives, the greatest healers that I have seen are people who have experienced great trauma. Now, I'm not saying I'm anything special, but if you live with any kind of baggage, it is the hole or the tear inside of us that allows the light to shine through. We can't do this if there's not a mirroring effect in the world around us. And the beauty of being a healer in the work that we're doing is it reaffirms every day with the work that we do what kind of lives we want to live. We're constantly experiencing this ebb and flow, and it's allowing us to really grow ourselves more than we actually grow the things around us. Now, it's a bit of a tangent. I don't know why I'm speaking on those terms, but I can say with trauma, I built up with my wife, we together rather, built up this farm-based business, but I carried a burden. I carried a trauma with me, and it seeped into every element of my life. The irony was that I wanted to create a sacred space, yet I wasn't able to work on myself first. And I thought the more I did out there, the greater impact I would have. But inside, my own house was burning. I was sad, I was disconnected. I was having metrics in the physical world, but as a farmer working 50 hours a week, it came at a cost. We burnt out. We realized fundamentally that community and human connection is the only way that we can achieve these kind of outcomes that I've spoken to. And this brings us back to the spirit of place, is this interconnection between the locale and the people that inhabit a space. But when we are in groups, we have a greater impact. And I presume many of you are aware of that from an energetic standpoint. You see the work of meditation. Perhaps you've come across things like the Heart Math Institute and the relationship of consciousness. But the more we connect together on some form of a egregore, some collective consciousness, the more we can have a greater influence. And this, when I started to realize what I was missing, I brought in some people to help me. And together we started doing electroculture experiments. And this is what started to get me out of my sleep, my slumber. It's like I fell asleep. I forgot a lot of things. And as I started to connect more, I realized, my gosh, like you couldn't see in that video I showed you, but where I am literally a stone throw away from one of the oldest cemeteries in this region. Ironically enough, it was that cemetery that prevented us from being able to get the approval to build our home legally on our land. What impact the dead have on that, I don't know. But there is an influence of not just the living human connection, but also the deceased that might linger along. And I know, Dawn, you have dabbled into this world far more than I have, I presume. But spirits and ancestors are there if we want to connect with them. And sometimes even if we don't. Here you'll see in this video here, if it loads up, in the distance, it's going to show you. Oh, glitching. I hope it's not glitching on your side too. The rendering. Can you see anything here? Or is it big ball of glitchy lines?
It is glitching this end.
Well, it's rather synchronistic because it's glitching right over the cemetery. Okay, that confirms what I'm trying to say here. Moving on. Spirits are interacting with us all the time. And as I said, whether we want to acknowledge them or not. I won't go on to some personal stories of that. There's not enough time. But one of the sites that I've had the honor of working with has an ancient necropolis, a burial site of the Etruscans who predate the Romans in this region, who face the sun at the burial sites. And in honor of this space, we planted out wild flowers in a giant meadow, which is truly beautiful, but in hopes of not appeasing the ancestors of space, but honoring, revering, acknowledging, and knowing that if we call upon the history of a space, we can work with it in the present in a myriad of ways. And we can do so in a way that creates a sacred space, which ultimately with the work that we do, that this should be what we're doing as healers, is we want to create spaces that have the qualities of the sacred, because those qualities are what give us health. It gives us awareness. It gives us insight, peace, stability, grace, magic. All of these things come from this space. For me, what fuels me on my land are my kids. It's giving them a space that it's what keeps me grounded when I disconnect, is to remember that I want to give them these qualities. And they've helped me and us with our farm. But you remember a little bit earlier, I said that we weren't legally allowed to build a home. I presume there's nobody in Italy here, and this isn't going to get to the bureaucrats and destitute us, but we built a home anyway. And even though we're very close to a municipality, we did so in hopes of anchoring ourselves at this space. And it was shortly after we did this that we had the invitation of some helping spirits, some helping hands that came to this space, which I'll speak on in a moment. But above us, we're very honored to have these very tall oaks. They shield us from the southern sun, which is very functional, also symbolic. You know, the world is a roller coaster at the moment, and it's important that you have a place that is sacred to you, that you can be grounded and connected in, where you can recharge yourself. Tangibly speaking, there are ways that we can harmonize with it. I'll just briefly say, we have this very large ramp right above our house that it brings down a lot of energy. I don't need to go into the details of what those energies are, but needless to say, it helped to put in glass, mirrors, certain round edges and qualities that allow that to flow better. And in the case of this round mirror, to get reflected. You know, this goes into the realm of feng shui, but acknowledging that we can't have things perfect all the time, but we can start to shift things. Like here's an example. I have one space near my house where I have a dragon line that passes through. And for whatever reason, it is not happy. And I'm yet to fully, this goes to show, you know, like we're all on a learning discovery, process of discovery. And all I've learned so far is that there's something that's not working. I think I disrupted it with our home, and we built it without honoring what was there. I didn't understand these principles at the time. And I put all this rusty sheet metal as the outer portion of the back wall of my home, which happens to cross right where there is this dragon line. And for whatever reason, I am seeing that in that vicinity, there are diseased plants, not just the tree, but multi-species exhibiting problems. Very strange. We're going to go into some ways that we can work with a landscape that can harmonize it. that can heal spaces, that can work with the challenges that we might already have. I'm gonna cover a lot of bases here, but very superficially, in hopes that it gives you a place where you can then learn more at your own, based on your own interests. Hopefully, there's also a few gems in there you can take away. But for me, nature spirits, the elementals, the devas, there's a direct connection with the living ecology of space. You know, from an animistic perspective, the idea that all things have spirit, that all things have various degrees of spirit and qualities to it, from a river to a forest to an individual organism that animate them, hence animism. It's a very important principle philosophically, even if you choose, not to believe in nature spirits, because it gives you a basis to commune your consciousness with other forms of consciousness. And by having that as a foundation, you can become receptive to things that otherwise you may not have otherwise been aware of. Here's an example. Okay, we're not Buddhist, but we put a Buddha statue here by this oak tree, and we built a very, very sacred garden around it. We used certain flowers and plant species that had a connection to protecting the home, such as wormwood and rue, that historically in Europe are connected to protection for the home space. And it brought in a resident fairy, which wasn't there before. How do I know that? Well, there's not enough time to go into that, unfortunately, in great detail. But preface to say, it can be felt. And not just from me, I've had other people, without giving them pre-warning, what is the heart node of this area? And right away, they go right to this spot. Interesting. When you create the space through your conscious intent, you can call upon protective spirits and forces that not just work to heal a space, but can create a synergy, a connection that is entraining you with that space. This is the heart pulse of this part of our land. And in honor of that, we had a spontaneous sambuco, a elderberry, grow that following fall. And it has grown remarkably tall in a very short amount of time. And the beautiful thing about elderberry, from a permacultural macro point of view, is that they grow in proximity to flowing water under the ground. The other thing that's important to note is that elderberry historically is the tree species of this region associated with anchoring the kin or the family into a property. Interesting. It came upon its own after we created the space. And the waterline component, which is very interesting, implies, as I've come to discover through my work, that we can redirect and channel geological forces, including water, beneath the earth, using our intent. But the greatest anchors, the greatest harmonizers, are sacred trees. Not just the sambuco that spontaneously grew on its own. This is a giant oak tree. It's the largest oak tree that I have seen in my life. And it's sacred in its way that it's fused itself with this circle where it parted itself and then re-emerged whole, creating the connection. This to the Etruscans of this region was considered sacred. And from an electroculture perspective, the oak tree concentrates iron in its leaves, and iron is ferromagnetic. And ferromagnetism is associated with magnetic currents. And the tree of a nexus point that is able to grow to a huge height, such as this tree here, is tapping into underground telluric electromagnetic currents, hence the iron, and is working as an antenna to the heavens and pumping energy from above, so below. And these kind of points, they have sacred associations because they radiate a field that can be felt, that can influence our consciousness, and that we can use to anchor in our focus, our intent, such as druidic practices of climbing up the sacred oak tree on the 21st of December and cutting off the mistletoe that in conventional terms, it parasitizes the tree. But it is the only plant, well, hardly a plant, that isn't influenced by gravity because it grows in all directions. It is the node that is pulsing that energy outwards, hence the heart that is severed and brought down through the intent of such a ritual. There are layers to symbolism in what I'm saying, but fundamentally, space matters. Living things have an influence. The geology, as I said below, has an influence. All of these things are interconnected in ways that if we tap into, we can begin to understand and see, like a window into a world that can change life. This has been my focus. How to create spaces that are not just sacred, but are functional, that are beautiful, that are ecologically diverse, that have all of these material principles at play, but layer in the elements that are unseen. Geopathic stress. Many of you understand geopathic stress from the relationship of geopathic stress to cancer beds, Hartmann lines, interference patterns in the home that can be harmful to one's health. There are forces such as underground water lines that are influencing aquatic plants. Like this is a saliche, a willow, which is a great dowsing tool associated with water. Notice the way these are growing away from the ionized field that is coming up, the electromagnetic signature from that water line. Some plants actually utilize forces that otherwise we could consider harmful. Some plants mitigate forces. The irony is that when we're designing gardens or planting spaces with living things, unless we tap into the esoteric realms and use principles of dowsing and the appropriate questions, we're just randomly placing plants. In nature, plants emerge where they need to grow because a tree will never move itself. It will orient itself to the magnetic field of the earth and to other forces that we could only begin to comprehend. And some areas with vortex fields, discontinuities of geology, unique electromagnetic signatures cause very strange phenomena to occur. Some trees, if we place them in the wrong place, don't utilize all these energies and it can disrupt the lymph and contribute to cancers. I've worked with harmonizing devices like the Slavkovsky coil in attempts to keep trees alive that were poorly chosen for a site selection. And that is something we have time at the end. We'll speak on some of the harmonizing devices that we can use. But the landscape is being influenced by unseen forces. Okay, this is a flower of a mullein, which is a wonderful herb, healing for the lungs. There was the massive solar storm, geomagnetic storm, that hit us in June, largest in 30 years. Could have been a Carrington event had it hit at the wrong angle, would have wiped out all our technology. It was that strong. The geology of this particular space pumped that energy, all that rain of high energy particles that come and came, influences radio waves in the atmosphere. It influences currents underneath the earth. It changes the way plants grow. And I've seen, as a result, so many plants prematurely flower this year. And in the case of some unique places where there is geopathic stress associated with a Hartmann line, as an example, we see very strange morphology features of the flower stalk, which is the antenna. It is the connector in the plant that is connecting to, it's the intermediary between the center of the sun and the center of the earth. Perhaps metaphorically, perhaps not. And we see that one of the principles that we can do is we can actually connect with our hearts to the center of the sun. This is truly bizarre. This is something that I don't know why I just said that, because I can't back it up at the moment with this amount of time with this presentation. It sounds pretty random, but let me see if it comes up as we go here. What I mean by the principle that what we're attuning to when we work with landscapes, when we work with energetics, is we're using the nexus point inside of us, that point that connects us to the entire universe, that connects us to God, that connects us to all of life, with the nexus points of other things, past, present, and future. And the center of the sun as a fusion reactor that is bursting out plasma and is sending out fields of energy that is influencing our heart rate, that we entrain with, and that trees entrain with. Something I want to leave you with just on that heart connection is, how do we know when we're being influenced by sun activity that we're actually not influencing the sun as well? You know, this is something I can say in this group, because there is an interconnection that is happening on all levels. And this is another example of geopathic stress associated with a pulse of solar energy that caused these plants to metamorphosize and induce their flower stalks, their flower stems, to attract the bee that comes and buzzes next to it, that creates a frequency that is just like the all-pervading sound of the universe, the Om, or the Amen sound of God, at the very focal point of the nexus of this flower that is connecting it to our sun. This is perhaps symbolism. Let's leave it at that. But I think there's deeper truths to these principles. What we make of it, I hope you can contemplate and meditate these things at your leisure, because it can open up new doorways of possibility. And this is what brings us into harmonizers. Because in nature, the most beautiful and profound harmonizers are the living things that are nexus points to the interconnected web of the universe, that are connecting through scalar waves of energy, that are not sending energy through space and time that is at the speed of light, that is undulating, but is actually 2 points that are interconnected, that as one side is pulled, the other side instantly receives it. This is the fundamental principle at the heart of what we're doing. And we see it when working with nature, because it mirrors it. And it becomes a symbol that we can use to anchor in these principles. And once we grasp that, then we can mimic through biomimicry, through understanding the principles of the universe, even if it's just the sacred geometry of a flower. If we start to tap into those, then we can create, through our intent and our physical hands, devices that can work in a similar fashion, that can anchor unseen forces, and if we do it appropriately, can do so for the benefit of life, which is what a harmonizer is. But at the root of it, our hearts are the greatest harmonizer that we have. Remember that. You can make external devices. You can use external devices as an intermediary to connect with the world around you through dowsing, as an example. But fundamentally, the mystic, there's a greater depth. They're all fractals that come out from this point. It becomes, these tools are gateways, so to speak. And of the 200,000 people in our community, our electroculture beginners to advanced community, the vast majority of the audience are not receptive to what I'm saying. So what do? We speak to the materialistic points of what I'm saying. I'm speaking in metaphor. I'm speaking in this way because I think I can touch your heart, where you can feel it. But through the medium of technology, the computer tech that hyperbolizes our brains, it can really sever that connection. So we need to hit people. We need to connect, rather. Hit is not the right. We need to connect with people where they're at, even if it means not touching on the subtle forces at all times. If there's time at the end of the presentation, I want to share with you the story that brought all of these points together. And if we can round off the presentation with this story that I had with a Native American church ceremony, it will make a lot of this metaphor that I'm speaking on more tangible. But let's see if we can connect with it from another place. So your hearts are creating a vortex of energy, okay? Which is the same principle of the earth, right? Now, I don't know how many people here affirm to the cosmology of the spherical earth. I personally do. Unfortunately, from my perspective, there's a vocal group that don't, but in our community, our electroculture community. But I personally see this as a very, very important connection here symbolically. There is, to that metaphor, that center of the earth, which is from the perspective of geology, is full of iron, nickel, ferromagnetic metals that are dense and heavy and generate a gravitational field. That's the argument. But that is also very interesting because it's the same. Iron is at the core of our blood. It is the representation of our hearts, right? It's what our hearts use, that pulsing, that vortexing of blood as it goes through the arteries to generate a magnetic field that can be measured by meters. Okay, measurable. You can do it through dowsing, and you can use dowsing as a way to actually tap into the subtle causal bodies, which are a whole other world, right? That can measure our fields that we're using through consciousness as we interact with the world around us. But from my perspective, it's using the same geometry, the same principles, the torsion fields. But the irony, okay, this is a bit esoteric, but the irony is that through the nexus points of life, the center of our eyes, right? This is our greatest nexus that we share with the world around us, right here, the pupil. But it's also the point that's connecting the light around us, but it's the nexus that brings us into the doorway of the soul. But why am I saying this? Because here, this goes into the mystic side of things. There is no separation, because at the center of this vortex, the infinity, is the point that connects all things. And it is accessible from the gateways of all things around us that we can in tune with. And when you go back, when I was speaking on elementals and fairies, and the energy that they represent, and the historical view of fairies animating, right, the flowers as an example, right, to allow the flower to open up. Isn't that beautiful though? Because it is that nexus is opening up that field of consciousness. And perhaps through these points of connection, we can enter into other realms that are not physically material, that we can touch and feel, that are more subtle. Many of you might have heard of a book called The Secret Life of Plants. This is the work of Cleve Baxter, which is one passage. There are many things in this book worth mentioning. Cleve Baxter did research using polygraph tests. These are lie detector tests to monitor plants and how they interact with human consciousness. What he realized through his research, that he was able to replicate many times, was that plants are responding to our intention, they're responding to our consciousness, and they're doing so, here's the fundamental truth, they're doing so irrespective of time, irrespective of distance. Meaning that if we wish through our intent to inflict harm truly on another living thing, irrespective of where that thing is, it feels it on some level. And a plant, this is why I work with plants, because plants are gateways to these worlds. We can monitor and measure the results of the work that we do by observing plants and how they respond. It's harder with inanimate objects, unless you're an intuitive, a psychic, to see or feel rather what our work is doing. I hope many of you are at a point or will reach a point where you can feel that, and you don't need to do research on plants. But this is why I work with plants, because it's materialistic. It can be seen so that others can enter into this world. But at the core of it, there is this entanglement, this interconnection. How to invite people in where they're at so that slowly other people can come to these fundamental truths of the universe. Because when we realize the impact that we have just by us being, not doing, I mean that's transformation. Okay. An experience I had, I don't have a picture of this, was that brought this into focus for me. What got me into the secret life of plants was I'm going to go talk fast on this story. I was meditating repeatedly in my early 20s at an altar. I created a physical altar. I used symbology of God or gods or goddesses, things, stones and crystals, representations that felt appropriate for me, that I could use to connect to the vastness of life. And I created this abstract altar that I put my intention upon through prayer, and it mirrored back at me. I used, tarot cards, and I would get symbolism and, start to see things in ways that opened up my subconscious mind, all very wonderful and powerful and profound for one on that path. But what I actually saw that was so fundamental was that as I sat there repeatedly for many days, not constantly, 15 minutes a day, flanked on either side of this coffee table, it was a low altar, it was a table, were two plants in vases. Okay. Out of my peripheral vision, as I would sit there, if I would focus my intent with my eyes open, or if I would meditate. And right above these plants at the corners of the room were two windows. And we all know that plants photosynthesize and they connect to the sun, energy, and light. And therefore, they want to open up their leaves to face the sun so they can do so. Here's what happened. As I sat there, slowly I became aware that those plants began to harmonize with myself and that altar. They still had themselves connected to the sun, but they began to connect to me. That nexus, right? That point that connects the sun to our hearts. And at the time it was profound, but I didn't realize then what I do now, which is, my gosh, when we live from a place of peace, all things prosper around us. This goes to the work that you do. You need to do it with love in your heart. More recently, I experienced this in another way. I built this pool for my kids. As I said, it's hot right now. They're probably in it as I speak. The first year I did it, I started from seed, this castor bean. It's what's used to make castor oil. This plant is 4 meters tall. It's massive, huge. It grew enormous. I've grown castor beans many, many times in many places. It's very abundant, easy to grow. This soil was shit. I'll be honest with you, from a biological perspective, from a topsoil, subsoil, compaction perspective, it was horrible. It is not conducive for any plant to thrive. This was the largest castor bean that I had ever grown. I can tell you it wasn't the chlorinated water splashing onto its roots that made it grow, because that's not a very good substance for healthy plants. It was the joy and laughter of my kids. We, whether we are aware of it or not, we are influencing the world around us all the time. This is a garden design that I did for a client that did not do well at all. And I did everything right from a materialistic perspective. Worm casting, biochar, microorganism extracts. I covered all the bases for the soil, for the ecology, for the diversity of plants, etc., etc., etc. I intuitively planted things. I did it from a place of calmness and respect. But I wasn't the primary steward of this space. The land that we inhabit. It becomes part of us. It resonates with us. We go back to Cleve Baxter and his research with plants. He was able, through his house plants and in training with his plants, when he would leave, his plants would suffer, irrespective of whether they were giving the appropriate nourishment from someone else, because that other person was not the primary steward. When you work with clients, you need to find ways to have them do the work, because you can't do it all. Here's the irony. I planted what is referred to as the sacred sage for Indigenous people in the plains of Canada, rather of Alberta down into the States as well, the desert region. Very sacred plant. I also put in the protector, the wormwood, the protector of the home. Do you remember I said the protector of the home? This particular client was experiencing a lot of disconnection from their space because they had worries of things that I can't go into here that severed their connection to their space. And what we see mirroring in nature, I've only seen this on a few occasions. This is the most parasitic plant that drains the lymph, the blood of plants that I have ever come across. If you have it, it is terrible and it spreads from piece to piece. But the question I want to ask you is, how did it get here? And why did it afflict the two plants that were supposed to be the anchor to this client and their space? They don't know this. I can't tell them that they are the cause, or were the cause rather, we resolved it, of the disease in these plants. What a scapegoat as a consultant would I be to say, it's your problem? But I should, because fundamentally it becomes my problem. If someone operating from a materialistic standpoint cannot see these fundamental truths. I'm not a miracle worker, and neither are you. But this is an example, sweet potatoes, they did not produce any roots whatsoever. Very symbolic, because these people did not have any roots on their land. They were not grounded there. The world around us through nature mirrors our internal processes in varying degrees. We're going to have insufficient time to go over everything here. Needless to say, working with water is an easy way to scale land restoration, I had the woman of the house, which is very important, female of the space, of that particular space. Because of her connection to Catholicism, I had her get water from a sacred well and sprinkle it upon her land with intention. And, well, consciousness and water are connected. The results happened, and I didn't have to change the soil. I couldn't do anything else. I was at my wit's end. But slowly, these problems disappeared. Now, there's a relationship to consciousness and geometry, our DNA and geometry, sacred mountains, and the angles of repose, which is the angle that sand will form upon gravity on our planet. It's the same angle of desiccated DNA. There is layering of symbolism here, not just abstract mathematics. There's a reason why sacred mountains are sacred. There's a reason why when we create particular devices, they can have ramifications in ways that are significant. This is a book well worth reading, Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, which goes into the relationship of sacred sites, particular megalithic and pyramidal structures that are on nodule points that influence caloric energy and can change gene expression in seeds and crops. And fundamentally, the hypothesis, the premise is that many ancient cultures used a lot of megalithic sites for fertility rituals because there was tangible results and there was a connection between their consciousness, their intent, but also the choice of substrates and materials that they use to make their sites and the locale in which they place them and the geometry and the time in which they do the rituals according to solar activity and all these fundamental points. But at the heart of it is it's interconnecting like a lock and key, all of these nodes together at one moment in time that can be a nexus that allows a greater amplification of our intent through group ritual and practice and prayer to have a tangible impact on life. And that is what is happening here when we see changes in corn, and why in many Mesoamerican cultures, the deity for fertility is related to corn because it was the lifeblood of their civilization. When they utilized their technologies appropriately, they had greater resiliency. Don't have enough time to go into how that all fell apart, and they started to have to use blood sacrifice in order to keep that going because there was a severing of the source. Remember, blood, right? We can connect with devas and angels, but we can also connect with demons and obtain similar results. But the end will always be chaos and destruction. Even if you have benefits in the short term, should you work with the wrong forces. We want to work with light. And there are devices that we can create using these principles that can influence life and become a catalyst for unseen energies. And this gets into the realm of electroculture. As you can see, we don't have enough time to go into all the details here. I'm going to scratch the surface. Those of you who want to stay after the 1.5 hour mark for any questions, you're welcome to do so. But we are going to go over. I apologize. I have a beginner electroculture masterclass that I do freely each season. And in the handout, if you want to join that, I go into more detail of how to use some of these devices. But premise to say, we are connecting to unseen forces of light and energy using geometry, using placement, using fundamental truths in order to stimulate life. Devices like spirals here that can have, and a copper vase as opposed to a terracotta ceramic vase. Copper being conductive, this antenna connecting to radio frequencies, changing the morphology of the plant. Other people have replicated the work that we've been doing and have seen incredible results with plants. I don't always communicate the underpinnings of these technologies. A lot of times what's actually happening is the enthusiasm of the steward as they get onto these devices is starting to have the greatest impact. And oddly enough, those who are the most cynical have the least results. You can still have results even if you don't believe in what these devices are doing, because there are fundamental truths. This is another device called the Lakosky coil, which mirrors the work of Georges Lakosky, Russian researcher who worked with, it's very similar to radionics in that certain coils can create a energetic field that has a stimulatory effect on life when oriented correctly. The opening of this always needs to face geomagnetic north. Interesting. This has to do with that field generation. And what it's doing is it's creating a nexus in the center, an energetic nexus that is allowing the lymph and minerals and enzymes and phytochemistry, et cetera, the plant uses materially to grow. Interesting, starting from the subtle and working up. Harmonizers, besides yourself, the Genessa crystal, this is something you can research at Future, done by Daryl George Langham in the 1950s, an American researcher who worked with sesame seeds. And he noticed that this device, which embeds all platonic solids in its geometry, stimulated life. He was an agronomist, but can also be used with humans. I like this. If you're going to meditate under a physical device that you create, do so under a Genessa and not a pyramid. I don't have enough time to explain why, but at its core is the harmonization of the round principles. Doesn't create any negative green, which can be harmful, which can also cause essentiation. Pyramids, however, are wonderful when used with plants, using to charge plants. Small doses, if you're going to sit under it, but can also be used to charge paramagnetic stones or crystals that can be broadcast at scale on vast areas of land, or in a garden, or even crystals in your home or that of a client that can have a beneficial effect, harmonizing effect. Not enough time to talk about how you can place these at certain nexus points, geologically speaking, that has a geobiological influence. But needless to say, other researchers have seen incredible results as well with plants. These potato plants here, 40 to 50 potatoes came from this copper pyramid at the corners, where one potato plant should only be able to make 4 to 5 potatoes. It made 10 times the amount, concentrating energy at the points. Very interesting. There are a lot of different harmonizers that exist. Many people in our community, they like to work with their hands. They're more art. Most people are interested in the art side of things, but want to make functional art. And these are some examples of some harmonizers that people have made that you can integrate with your work for disrupting geopathic stress, for redirecting certain energies, amplifying others, etc. Once you understand some of the principles, you can start to use some of these devices. But this presentation is just to show you that these things exist, but also to affirm, because I care about all of you and I think you understand deeply, that at the core of all of these devices is actually you, or the creator of the devices. There are, irrespective of the individual, there are some principles that have an influence, but you don't always have to use physical things. You can make gardens or designs that utilize energy. Do you remember that vortexing energy of the trees spiraling? You can channel that in a constructive way, right? Through spiral forms. You can amplify it. You can balance through yin and yang. The principles I spoke on earlier, paramagnetic materials with diamagnetic materials. Diamagnetic would be quartz, as an example. Paramagnetic would be basalt, volcanic stone. The right balance through dowsing of the feminine and the masculine in the right context, depending on your landscape, to create your desired result. There are many, many layers in which these technologies can be used. And they can be scaled. This is a design that I did called the Galaxy Garden, which is very large, 100 square meters, 150 different edible plant species. This is a large piece of land art that was doused at the center of a unique point that was supposed to take that energy and radiate it outwards and create a vortex effect, amplifying the existing vortex that was already there for the benefit of life. And I have seen that particular project worked very well. And I had great results with it and continue to have great results with that particular client. So a lot of these principles that I'm speaking on, they can scale, but ultimately you need to remember the fundamental thing I'm going to leave you with is returning back to that nexus principle. This is a sunflower. Look at the size of those leaves, okay? And its head, enormous. I mean, genetically, it's a pretty good specimen. Like, I can't take all the credit. You know, it is a gigantic sunflower. But sunflowers are a really cool example of a plant that works as a harmonizer. You know, you can plant, if you have the luxury of a piece of land that you can leave to your kin, that you know is going to outlive you, you can ceremoniously plant a tree that is going to be that anchor, that node that can create an amplificatory effect that's positive to that land base, right? That radiates the love of your family, of that space outwards. But you can also do it with a plant that only grows 1 year, such as sunflower, that its head follows the sun, right? Very symbolic, follows the sun. And at the point here, at the center, right, that nexus is the gateway, and the fractaling patterns of the Fibonacci sequence, right, that 1 + 2 = 3, but then the point that precedes it plus the present creates the future. That is life. The point that precedes and the present creates the future. That is in the mathematics of the Fibonacci sequence. That fractals outwards from all nexus points, whether it's the center of a spiral galaxy or whether it's the center of this sunflower, or whether it is the center of our heart that is vortexing our blood in that exact spiraling pattern as it passes through our arteries and generates our magnetic field. That is what I'm going to leave you with. That nexus is right in the fundamental geometry of the universe. And at its center is 0. It is the Vesica Pisces, at the center of two circles, right? Where two become one, where male and female create, that then becomes the doorway to new life. I'm going to leave you with that symbolism because as you work with homes and you work with landscapes, using principles that you'll study with Dawn, with Tim, with Adrian, whomever else are in a leadership role within the community, this is the connection that goes beyond dogma of God, right? It is that connection to infinity. And we can always reconnect to that for the benefit of life. And that's what I wanted to share with you today.
Oh my goodness, Ray, my head has just exploded. What a journey you've taken us so much. And, like every good presenter leaves us wanting more, which is phenomenal. But I would love just to questions, but I would love just to open that up to anybody in our group that has some questions for Ray.
Wonderful.
I got a question.
Yes, Mike.
Hey, Ray, that was wonderful.
Thank you.
Fascinating, and so many things you touched on resonate with me, like on a real deep level, because I'm in the part, like on a homestead too. I'm curious,
Sorry, Mike.
like our
Mike,
homestead's an area.
Sorry, Mike. Can you please talk slowly because your connection in your car isn't the best. So I can hear you properly.
Can you hear me better, or should I type?
Yep. Just try. Let's see what we can do.
So my homestead is in an area which sounds like the Salt Island or something you spoke of. There's a lot of quartz, and in the geomatics next storm map is like basically the purple, like the highest. It's very high energy. What are your thoughts on trying to have what you're talking about in an area like that?
So let me just repeat what you said so I make sure I understand what you're saying. That cut out a little bit, Mike. So what I hear you saying is that you have started a homestead on a piece of land that has a unique geological features to it that is very amplificatory, maybe quartz, maybe otherwise, that is very powerful energies. And your question is whether that is one, a good place to start a homestead. And I think at the root of it is if you're there, how can you do so in a way that is mitigating some of that energy or harnessing it? Is that perhaps
Thank
what
you.
you're
Exactly. Yes, thank you. Exactly.
Well, that gives me the opportunity to go back to the story that I wanted to tell, which was the story of the ceremony that I did on Salt Spring Island. That island, as I said, quartz deposits beneath it, a lot of salt springs, salt having all the minerals, trace elements, right, that all have their own frequencies that spring out of the water and vortex upwards and creates a resonant field that is very charged, that can be a gateway to other dimensions for those who are not grounded, those who are mystics, those who are even using drugs. These kind of spaces can be beneficial for insight. They can also be very dangerous because of the fact that they are stronger gateways. And what I experienced at this site was we did this ceremony. We had a teepee on site. There was a pond on this person's homestead. And the intention of the group was to, through prayer, through active drumming and chanting with an indigenous elder using Lakota singing all night long, was to charge the water of the space and therefore the water of the earth and impart the energy of our hearts outwards, right? And we did so through chanting, rhythmic drumming, ceremony. We used some peyote, which was more of a stimulant to keep us awake. We fasted, we prayed. It was very powerful. And we stared at the center of a fire in the center of the teepee. And the fire keeper throughout the night created the ashes in such a way, the ashes of the fire in such a way that it created a crescent moon that corresponded with the moon cycle of the moment, right? The crescent moon that opened its crescent at the doorway of the teepee that faced the rising sun eastward, that brought the center of the heart of the sun upon rising in the morning to unite with the center of the fire and the center of the moon being the feminine, the fire being the sun, the unity in the center, radiating out of the tip of the open teepee with the geometry of 72 degrees, which is the geometry of anchoring in the Fibonacci sequence, vortexing the energy upwards of our prayer and our intention, which rotated through the ritual of the fire of the roadman who passed the sacred medicine in a counterclockwise motion that brought the energy of our intentions upwards. You see the symbolism in this? Why am I saying this to you, Mike? One is to tell you an incredible story, but two is to anchor in the fact that you can use ritual, you can use practice, you can use community in such a way as to utilize this energy that is present without short circuiting yourself. Okay? And that means, one, you need to create lots of mixed plants around your homestead. You want to have a lot of trees. You want to have a large, if possible, in your climate, right? To create a Schumann resonance. You can use devices like in this presentation. The one device I would recommend, which we can speak about another time if you're interested, is the menhir, the standing stone artificially made that's used to be the anchor of your space, but the anchor of your intent and that of your community, to take that energy and catalyze it and transmute it so that it moves outwards. And when I go back to my story here, that's what we were doing in that ritual. And I kid you not, that morning when the sun united, where all things united, right, through the ceremony and the symbolism, we left the teepee. But before I did so, I have to say, sorry, is we all heard this audible humming noise like an orb that passed through us going clockwise. And every time it passed by at head level, ear level, it would go in the ear and out the other, and it would go as the caloric currents from the sun hitting the earth and the earth wanting to unite with the sun brought that energy upwards with our intent through the center of the teepee. It left an audible hum that sent our prayers out to the universe. And when we left, that entire space was so magnetized that the water and the dew, there was so much dew and water droplets everywhere that it was like magic. I've never seen anything like it. We prayed to the water, and I was young. You know, we're hippies then, and I'm still kind of a hippie in some ways, but us youngins, we all got naked and we dove right into that pond. And it had so much oxygen that paramagnetic charge of the earth, the oxygen was bubbling up, that it was like it was Salt Spring Island. It wasn't salt water, but we floated. So in all of that answer, there's a lot of symbolism. If we want to go deeper, we can talk another time, but heartfelt practice is the way to go.
the intent, it sounds like the intent or intention is the key, which that makes sense to me. That resonates with me. So thank you.
Yeah, and because if you can't use the energy, it will short circuit you, right? Like people go crazy in certain places and start to get psychotic, right? Like there are some places where the veil is so thin that if you don't have ways to anchor the energy, it is not conducive for mental health. Now, I don't know if if that happens to be a place, but it needs to be done with ritual, ceremony, heart, and a few devices and living systems.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Any other questions?
I'd like to ask Ray one as well. That's okay.
Yep. And then Marie.
Yeah, Melanie.
Oh no, Marie
Oh,
first.
sorry, Marie.
Sorry, me
Marie?
first.
Okay, who's first?
Marie.
You can go ahead, Melanie.
No, mine's long. You go. You go.
Oh, okay. Well, mine could be long based on the last one. So back a few slides where there were like spiral gardens created with rocks.
Yep.
So yes, that's the one. So you were saying to incorporate the yin and yang, you would use like quartz and basalt, and you were saying words that describe them, and one of them sounded like para something. I'm just wondering what
Yes.
that was, what those two
Yeah,
words were.
this is the curse of knowledge. Paramagnetism
Okay.
was the word I
And
used
which
to
one is
describe.
paramagnetism?
Okay, so
Which one is that?
basalt, granite, are all paramagnetic stones. When you think paramagnetism, think the king's chamber of the pyramids of Giza. Pink granite rather, is the most paramagnetic stone, and it covers the whole king's chamber. Okay, paramagnetism is a way of measuring magnetic force, and certain stones, depending on their elements, are paramagnetic. And what that means in simple terms is that when you have a magnetic field, if we go back to that torsion field, right? When you have a magnetic field that is moving, let's say for simple terms, we say it's moving along a landscape. If you had a paramagnetic stone throughout that landscape, it would channel electrons as the magnetic current runs through. So paramagnetism is a way of measuring a substance that aligns with a magnetic field. It aligns itself with a magnetic field while the magnetic field is present. Whereas diamagnetism is more feminine. It runs perpendicular to a magnetic field. And the whole idea when I say paramagnetism and diamagnetism, another way you can think about it is if one is creating an alignment in a vertical axis and the other is creating an alignment in a horizontal axis, you have the symbol of the cross, right? And there is the center point where 2 points of energy are balanced, male and female. And when you're working with a landscape, you can use dowsing and other means to understand how much of that geology is paramagnetic, how much of it is diamagnetic. You can speak to a geologist as well. But what you want to do then is you want to use the right amount to then balance the energy. So if you have a space that's too paramagnetic, it's too yin, too yang rather, it's really masculine, it's really energetic, it's aligning with magnetic fields, it's like energy is flowing. Whereas the female diamagnetic quartz is an example of diamagnetic energy. It channels the energy perpendicular. It's grounding. It's horizontal. It's like an out breath. You know, this is the symbolism here. So there are ways that you can use certain substances in a design in a garden, stones that can balance these energies for certain outcomes.
Okay. So those
It's
spiral
pretty.
gardens in the pictures,
Yeah.
were they like alternating those stones?
No, what the spiral gardens are doing, one is they're allowing different light angles, so you can grow different types of plants depending on their position. And two, if you can use dowsing rods to find a point that's a Hartman node or a Curry node or both, right? And you can then dowse to see that there's a certain vortex where the energy is coming out of the ground and spiraling upwards. You can mirror that with your design in honor of that energy, and you can help bring that energy up to a focal point, in which I would put in the center a homeopathic blend of something paramagnetic and something diamagnetic, right? That then is honoring that central nexus of that energy as it meets with the energy of the sun. So it's creating a circuit, essentially.
Okay.
And as a result, you're mitigating any harmful effects of geopathic stress that could be a result of that area in the context of physical space outside of the home.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Question from Paul before you, Melanie.
Hiya, I'm more than happy for Melanie to go first because mine might be long, you never know.
No, Paul, carry on, sweetie, no problem.
Okay, all right. Hiya, thank you for a really enlightening talk. It's on two parts in one sense. One is I'm part of the group over here that we've created for like-minded people on exactly this same thing, but we've come at it from a slightly different angle that's brought us together. So there's about 12 to 15 of us doing the paramagnetic stuff, the plant stuff. But what brought us together was bees and energy nodes and what research we'd been doing on that space in the first instance. You haven't mentioned bees in your talk that I noticed, so I wasn't sure what experience you had with them, but also from the point of view, not just bees we found, we've also seen the same correlations with bats, that clearly energy nodes are a point of attraction, and the energy lays that are coming out are very clearly part of the navigation system of both species. So we're sort of piecing quite a lot of information together.
The bee line.
Yeah, the way the bees. Yeah.
The bee line, the ability for a bee to go in a straight line, irrespective of any features around us.
Yeah, we when you douse it, you find that they're actually picking up the energy lays and varying different degrees of. If you were using Rory Duff's basis, classification of line 3, line 4, or whatever else, type 3, type 4. But what we've also found is that the nodes themselves, the crossing points, are a point of attraction. So one bee school didn't even realise they were on sacred land and had a round barrow in the middle of their field. But I pointed to where the node was without them knowing that there was a node there. And then they said, oh, did you know? And I didn't know their result was we've had 8 swarms to that point and that branch in the last year. So there's clearly seems to be a correlation. Yeah, the swarms had actually congregated to that point, and that's where they were coming to create their nest.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
So I wasn't sure what experience you have of bees or this, and what we're also working out is that the antenna and the compound eyes are very specific to working with that energy. as well as the voltage between themselves and the flower, etc., which is some stuff that's already on now starting to come out in the net.
Well, Paul, firstly I just want to say amazing work. I'd be honored to speak with you more about this outside of this call in more detail, because I want to know more about what you're doing with this group. But in answer to your question, so there's a lot of ways I could go at that. Bees are very interesting on many levels. One is the bee humming sound, the vibratory effect of their wings, their ability to they're essentially generating electrogravitic fields that can allow them to fly. Like there's some very fundamental things. The collective
very much with the bumblebee, because it doesn't meet the aerodynamics.
I mean, from a symbolic standpoint, I would think about that humming effect being that they are harnessing that nexus point energy to generate a field that is, if we look at it as the bees are actually not a separate organism, and that they are an intrinsic part of that ecosystem, which is a superorganism, we can see that as a manifestation of that energy being radiated outwards. It's interesting that in mystics' perspective, one of the pranayama and yoga practices that's very well practiced to connect to God, Brahman, whatever term you want to use, is the bee humming breath. And it's to create that humming sound, which stimulates the pineal gland, which is, the nexus here. There are many layers to it. In the context of working with plants, I have seen that placing beehives on points of geopathic stress, so like a Hartmann node, will cause a larger yield of honey. But if they're left at that place, they will swarm. They won't stay for a long time. So I don't know what exactly it means. I think the bees are working in mysterious ways. And I'll also say that with the work of Phil Callahan, who I've read a lot of his work with the round towers of Ireland, he worked with insects professionally, and he also worked with in World War II. He was stationed in Ireland, and he worked with radio receivers for the RAF pilots. So he understood electromagnetism and radio waves. He hypothesized that insect antennas were picking up on frequencies and that they used it for navigation. That was the first point I came across that. Then the ultimate question that needs to be asked with our work as healers is, as we generate more artificial magnetic fields, as we integrate smart meters and 5G technology and things of this nature, and satellite grids, etc., as we create this energetic smog, we need to start to understand how we can mitigate that in order to prevent losses of pollinators and other insects that use these energies, and migratory birds. And what I would propose with the work that we do is using the work of Phil Callahan with these miniature versions of these round towers, these power towers, which I mentioned, can anchor in and amplify the Schumann resonance in a given locale, which I would hypothesize is going to create a space that is more conducive for insects to thrive irrespective of electromagnetic spawn. So we want to amplify natural energies through artificial means in order to mitigate these stresses.
Yeah, one of the guys is playing around with that at the moment. So he's doing some experiments in his garden.
Wonderful. Well, I'll send you, rather you can send me an email and we can get in contact at a later point.
Yeah, Dawn's, I think, on our group list as well, and anyone else is more than welcome to join our stuff as well. So it's just, there's no videos per se. We're just sharing information and working together. So we have several hundred hives between us all.
Amazing.
And Marie, who's on the call here, is our beekeeper on the island, and would be really interested in the work that you're doing as well.
Yeah, love to share it. The more we get out there.
It's rather synchronistic that you didn't go first. Rather, you did go first. Rather, sorry, I apologize. Melanie needs to ask a question.
I've got a million questions. I have written pages. Just to point out that that's Alana's book. Is it Paul?
Yes.
Yeah. That's just up the road from me. That literally is just a couple of miles that way, and in Galway. That's the one. That's it. And I'm going up to play with Alana next month, so I'll let you know. What I wanted to say was about the spirit of place right in the very beginning, and
yes,
talking to what Mike had said. I, like you, I've been a gardener since dot, and I was at agriculture college, then did ecology and worked in forests. So I've always worked with the earth.
Oh, wow!
And it's my. I
didn't realize that about you.
Oh yeah, I mean the forest. But the several times I've had an experience of spirit of place. When my husband and I first met, we were campaigning to save a woodland in Greenwich, which is on the edges of London. And it was an ancient woodland that was 4,000 something years old. And they wanted to chop it down and build a motorway, an 8-lane motorway. They were known as the lungs of London. And they're one of the very few green spaces that, I grew up playing there. So everyone from the locality got together and was fighting it. And I belonged to a magical ecological group where we used to do eco magic. And that's where I met my husband, as he turned up to help as well. And we used to do ritual in the woods, which was wonderful. And there was loads of us. We even had a whole event with Jonathan Porritt and David Bellamy and all sorts of people who came to it as well, which is wonderful. But the whole point was they'd been trying to save that wood for 20 years. They kept it at bay, but they couldn't stop it. And then all these people got together and we started doing intentional magic in the actual woods itself, usually at night when there wasn't too many people around. And I'm not saying that we fixed it, because they've been doing much, much more work than we did. But we got involved with the campaigning and the leaflets, and I used to give talks and everything about ecology. But the whole point, it was on both levels. And we literally did this amazing ritual one night in the woods, drawing the dragon energy of the earth up. It was just stunning. There was about 50 of us in a circle, and we literally all saw the dragon come up and went out. It was just absolutely stunning. And it came out of water, which freaked us out because we had no idea that there was water underneath us. And it was only a little while later, talking to one of the locals, I found that was where a reservoir was below us. We didn't know it was there. It was a whole massive reservoir.
You're saying that everybody in the group of 50 saw an energetic dragon form emerge?
All saw or felt it. The energy was amazing. It literally whizzed around the circle and went straight up. But everybody saw it coming out of everyone afterwards when we sat and discussed it. It came out of water, but we didn't know it was this reservoir below. But the point was, it was the working with the energies of the woods and working with the genus loci, spiritus loci, that we think made a big difference. Because before, everyone was trying to campaign and they even cycled to Brussels to give in things. We did all sorts of stuff to stop it. But personally, I felt when we did that ritual, it was almost like we were asking the land to help us as well, or that we were here to help the land. I don't know which way you'd see that, but it made a tremendous difference. And it was the only time the Department of Transport in London ever lost. They literally lost the whole thing. And we were told they brought in all these new laws saying that they were going to stop us meeting, and there was only so many people could meet in one place. It was getting like really, really restrictive, and we were thinking that's it, we've lost. And we were working with Twyford Downs, which you've probably never heard of, which was a big another one motorway, M3 I think it was, and they just went straight into direct action, which is we didn't do. We actually mapped every single tree in the woods, and we adopted them out to people. We sold them each one and just said, right, this is yours, end whatever number it was, and we gave an adoption certificate, and people would buy the tree. And then when there was ever any problem, they'd come and literally defend that particular tree. And sometimes there was 3 or 4 people for one tree. So it was almost like,
Well, that is amazing. Which it's like that each person was in training themselves with that individual tree, which is incredible. Yeah.
But it was like it was like co-creation. That's how I looked back on it and thought, well, that's what we were doing. We were co-creating a relationship with the woodland, saying that we care about you, we love you, we don't want you to be destroyed. Because I had a child. I mean, my child was a kid at the time. I was thinking, I want him to grow up there as well. So we all had different reasons for being there. And even the fire brigade and the police, because I used to work in a woods very close, they all told me that if it ever comes to direct action, they're all going to go a blue collar flu. They're all going to go sick. So they weren't there. So there was all sorts of amazing response. But it was like a community that got together to defend one space. And before, it was so fragmented, not because of anything we did, but because the government was trying to push and push and push everyone out. Because when everyone suddenly started working with the land and caring and loving and using the heart centre, as you were saying earlier on, suddenly one day they just stopped. They just wrote to us and said, "Oh, we've decided we're going to put it somewhere else," and it's never been back ever. They've tried 2 or 3 other times, and it's always just bounced off as if it's just there. And I hope it always will be, because it's a beautiful space. But that taught me about the whole relationship with spirit of place, and we need to work with a space rather than for a space. We need to work in cooperation with it. Does that make sense?
With a space instead of for a space, yeah. Because
Like
otherwise, yeah, we're not actually we're not honoring the space itself.
Exactly. And we don't own it. We don't own the land. We don't own anything. I mean, when we bought our land here, we've never said we own it. We share it because
Well, that's the power. That's the power of the humility that comes from that, philosophical view, means that you work differently with the space, and the space itself, I think, works with you differently as well, which is beautiful.
But if we did that with the whole planet, imagine what a different world we'd live in. I mean, this is what the indigenous people were always doing. They saw things as brothers and sisters rather than as trees or commodities or things that they could harvest.
I just want to add to that, because that's the biggest lesson that I've learned coming to live in Canada on Vancouver Island and understanding the history of colonization for Indigenous people. I'm going to be talking a little bit about that on Thursday, but that it's taught me about relationship with the land and humility and walking softly and being in partnership, because we have a very colonial Western way of imposing our will on everything. And we need to shift that if the planet's going to thrive.
Totally agree, Dawn. I totally agree.
You're right. And actually, as a farmer, that's what I did. Like when I was emotionally at my lowest point, was when I was manipulating the land for material benefit. The irony is that I never made a lot of money doing what I was doing. And it caused me to become robotic and separate myself from the spirit of place. And I was depressed as a result. So it's an empty path. It's the realm of hungry ghosts, and it results in a great deal of suffering. And the legacy that you speak of, Dawn, because I'm from Vancouver Island and I understand what you're saying very well. The legacy of colonialism is alive and well in the opioid epidemic. Yeah. It's alive and well in the crisis of mental health. It is far deeper than the impacts we have on the land base. It is a severing of of that connection. And it leaves a void that can never be filled through material means. And I think that is something fundamental at the heart of colonial culture. And I don't know how to change that really, but I think it's happening in certain circles, and I think that's how it starts.
The only change that we can bring about is first of self, and then everything else falls into place. And there's research that says, the power of eight. Lynn McTaggart's work, 8 people with the same intention can shift the external environment. So we just have to show up in a way that
Yeah, you're right.
bring around change. Be pebbles in the pond. That is my thought. Melanie, did you have other questions then? That was an amazing story that you shared. One of my phrases that I'm known for is "you can't make this shit up," and you just
You definitely can't. Well, we've had all sorts of stories. I mean, when we moved to Ireland, you were saying about Ireland earlier on, we came here on a honeymoon just for fun. I'd been here in the 80s with an ex-boyfriend, but I've only been to the Southern Ireland once, and I just fell in love with Southern Ireland. And we went looking at houses because in the 90s, the very early 90s, you could buy a house for less than you could buy a car now. It was ridiculous. And loads of land as well. And we literally looked at one house and thought, no, that's terrible big. Went to the second house, and the man said, don't fall in love with this. Everybody does. And it's haunted. And I thought, okay, you've sold it. But it turned out to be the Anshi, the fairies, if you call them that, the little people. And with that land, we were told that there was a fairy fort above us where we live, and there is 2 fairy trees in the field, and that for 40 years no one's been able to live here because it's special land. And I think every bit of land is special, but this was inhabited. Does that make sense if I say that? And so when we got here, because Wolf is my husband's the same, we're both pagan and druids. And so what we did was when the man left, we came back here and we did a little ritual in the garden. We actually found a little patch and we sat down and we gave offerings and we talked to the land and we talked to the Anshi and we asked them to help. And we walked away thinking, oh, we don't have any money, we can't really buy this. It was just a bit of fun. And all the money literally turned up out of the weirdest, strangest places. And within 3 days, we had owned a farm that we weren't even serious about buying. It was almost like we'd made an agreement with the land. And we moved here, and it's been wonderful. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else now. I love where I live. And it's also quartz, red sandstone and shale. And it's very, very, it's quartz everywhere. You dig the garden, there's quartz. And up the road is the Burren, which isn't very far away, which is one of the most amazingly magical places. If you do come, I'm going to drag you around the Burren. You will love the Burren. That's very close to where this is. And but okay. It's almost like the relationship with the land was what made it important. We ask permission to do things here. Like the studio I'm sitting in now, which is a new one. You're not supposed to build on the west in Ireland ever. It's a real big no-no. It's a pishog, as it's called. It's bad luck. But there's certain things you can do. So folklore is full of all this stuff, what we're supposed to do that we don't do anymore. And so I spoke to all the farmers and they said, well, you put 4 sticks up and you leave them for a week and you ask permission. And if even one goes down, you can't build. And they stayed. And every single time we followed the traditions, it's all in the history and our folklore. You must have that in Canada as well. The indigenous people would have certain things they wouldn't do or would do.
Sure, we absolutely do. And we've ignored their voices and silenced them and tried to eradicate them for, hundreds and hundreds of years. And, I think things are shifting and changing, and we really do need to be, have indigenous thought leadership on how we work with the land, for sure.
Anyway, I won't go on because I get very passionate about this subject. I love the land, so I want to be a land healer.
We're very conscious of time, and many people have dropped off, unfortunately, there. But lots of thank yous in the comments, because yes. Ray, I think you have inspired us. You've certainly given us lots of food for thought, and for me personally, I would say just a remotivation in terms of the work that we do and how important it is. So thank you for inspiring me to continue with this as well. It's just been, fantastic. Thank you so much for taking your time to come and chat with us. I'm sure we'd love to have you back. Watch this space, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person in September at the Questers Conference.
Likewise.
I feel very blessed.
Can I also say that we've invited Ray to talk to the eZoom as well, hopefully next year, won't we, Ray, with any luck?
Yeah, I would very much like that.
Paul and I, we're in the main kind of group, so Paul will be somebody to talk to as well, the one you were just chatting. There he is, the very handsome man himself.
Okay, there he is.
Oh, Paul.
I am here, I'm just saving bandwidth.
But he would make an excellent speaker for the eZoom, wouldn't he?
Oh,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, fabulous.
Yeah.
So yes, so thank you. I'm just going to say something else then, and I can't.
Well, one thing I would apologize for is I didn't give a lot of it was very superficial, and there's not a lot of takeaway meat, so to speak. But truth be told, very hard in a short amount of time to I want it to kind of cover a large space so that in the future, if there's opportunities to work together more, I'm more than happy to share more specifics. So
Brilliant.
let's Dawn, let's get in contact independently after this if we can and start a conversation.
Plot and plan.
So can I add one last thing, Dawn? Sorry to interrupt. You know the Janessa symbol? Janessa, have I said it correctly? Janessa? Janessa. We created a sigil for the eZoom. We all put our own words in, and we created a sigil, the new symbol for the eZoom, which we're going to use when we have a website, which Paul is designing. Are you still there, Paul, lurking?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Still there.
Yeah, I'm here.
And it was actually Chris, wasn't it, who suggested using that symbol?
I think so, yeah.
So he sent it. My husband's a graphic designer, so he designed the actual symbol, and we put that actual crystal in the background. So it's actually part of our symbol, and it just felt so right. It just felt perfect. So I'll send you a copy.
Beautiful.
So
There's no
That's
accident.
very cool.
no synchronicity.
It's interesting, and it came out as a Janessa crystal.
I will send it to you, Ray. I'll email you the picture, and you'll be able to see it.
I get to see what a Janessa crystal looks like, 2 dimensions.
Sadly, only 2 dimensions.
So Ray, we will be inviting you into our Facebook group and put you on our email list, so you'll get alerted for the sessions that are coming up. You're welcome to join any one of those sessions as a thank you for giving your time to us.
Oh, it's very generous. Thank you.
We will pop the recording on Facebook and also send it out via email as well for your viewing pleasure. So thank you. Thanks, Paul and Tabitha, for being stalwart.
Well, thanks for organising.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting.